Ramallah, West Bank, June 22, 2001. At 10:03 hours, a man who never shows his face sits down in a radio studio. Khalil al-Rashid puts on headphones. Hamas's most secretive military commander believes he is about to win a propaganda victory on Al Jazeera radio. Outside, armed guards lock down the street. Inside, 3 quiet technicians adjust cables and check signal levels. But this interview was never about words. 36 hours earlier, Israeli intelligence labeled it Operation Silent Wave. And when the broadcast ends, the microphones will still be live, but the target will not. Khalil al-Rashid was born in 1968 in the northern West Bank. He came of age during the First Intifada, watching Israeli soldiers patrol his streets while his neighbors threw stones. One event crystallized his path. At 17, he witnessed his uncle's arrest at a checkpoint. The man was held for 6 months without charges, released broken and silent. Young al-Rashid learned a lesson that would define his career. Visibility meant vulnerability. By his mid-20s, al-Rashid had mastered the art of operational invisibility. Unlike charismatic leaders who appeared at rallies and funerals, he became known precisely because he could not be seen. His power came from being a name without a face, a signature without fingerprints. Israeli intelligence files from 1998 described him as low noise, high output. The kind of commander who planned bombings with spreadsheet precision, but never delivered speeches. The capability that made him dangerous was compartmentalization. Al-Rashid communicated only through trusted couriers who themselves knew no names. He rotated safe houses every 48 hours, sleeping in different beds before sheets grew familiar. Associates described him as methodical, never impulsive. Where other commanders sought glory, al-Rashid sought results. He refused phones entirely, knowing every signal was a thread Israeli intelligence could pull. This discipline made him strategically irreplaceable. By 2001, Shin Bet assessed him as Hamas's operational brain in the central West Bank. He selected targets, he approved logistics, he allocated resources, but he never appeared in photographs. Intelligence services had tracked al-Rashid for 3 years, accumulating a portrait assembled from negatives, places he wasn't, meetings he didn't attend, operations that bore his invisible signature. By June 2001, Israeli intelligence concluded al-Rashid represented a Category 1 threat. His recent operation had killed 4 Israeli civilians and embarrassed security forces who arrived 12 minutes too late. The authorization to eliminate him came directly from the Prime Minister's office. But conventional methods offered no pathway. Direct capture meant urban combat with predictable casualties. Airstrike risked killing civilians in dense neighborhoods. A raid would trigger gunfire before operatives breached the first door. Then al-Rashid made his first mistake in 3 years. He decided to speak. The interview request came through intermediaries. Al Jazeera wanted comment on recent Hamas operations. Al-Rashid initially refused, as he had refused 50 previous requests. But his political handlers argued the information war mattered as much as the armed struggle. Israel controlled the narrative. Hamas needed counterweight. A radio interview carried minimal risk. Audio only, no cameras. Broadcast from a secure location. His voice would be electronically masked. The building would be locked down. Armed guards would screen everyone entering. To al-Rashid, it was calculated risk management. To Israeli intelligence, it was an opening. Israeli doctrine since the late 1990s emphasized media exploitation as an operational domain. The strategy bore the codename Resonance Protocol. The logic was straightforward. Media events created predictable patterns, Fixed schedules, known locations, relaxed vigilance. Signals Intelligence Unit 8200 monitored Palestinian broadcasts continuously, tracking not just content, but logistics. They knew which studios Al Jazeera preferred. They knew which local fixers coordinated interviews. They knew the technical requirements for live transmission. When SIGINT intercepted coordination messages between Al Jazeera staff and Ramallah contacts on June 19th, analysts immediately flagged 3 critical details. First, the interview location. A mid-size radio studio in a commercial building, 3rd floor, eastern exposure. Second, the transmission window, 45 minutes of guaranteed live airtime beginning at 1000 hours on June 22nd. Third, the technical requirement. Upgraded equipment to prevent signal dropouts during what internal messages called a high-risk live interview. For the first time in 3 years, Al-Rashid would be stationary, indoors, trusting, strangers on a fixed schedule. The vulnerability window was exactly 45 minutes. The obstacles remained formidable. The building would be secured by Hamas guards who knew every face in their network. The studio location was urban dense, surrounded by residential apartments. Escape routes led through hostile territory. Any gunfire would draw immediate response. The target himself remained unidentified. No photographs existed, no confirmed physical description beyond medium build, dark hair. Operatives would need to execute an assassination without visual confirmation of their target until the moment of action. Despite these challenges, planners identified their opportunity. Al-Rashid's security protocol created paradox. His obsession with invisibility meant he would arrive without the typical commander's entourage. Heavy security would draw attention. He would blend in, trust the building's perimeter defense, rely on anonymity rather than bodyguards. Inside the studio, he would be alone with technicians. What if the technicians weren't technicians? Planning shifted from theoretical to operational on June 20th. The mission fell to a specialized Mossad cell designated Echo 3, selected for 3 capabilities: fluent Arabic with Palestinian dialect mastery, technical broadcast training sufficient to pass professional scrutiny, and close quarters combat certification. The team leader held a degree in electrical engineering from a European university. The second operative had worked as an actual broadcast technician in Beirut for 2 years in the mid-90s. The third was a woman, chosen specifically because Palestinian security culture often reduced vigilance around women in technical roles. The equipment cases would carry standard audio gear. Underneath false bottoms lay suppressed 9mm weapons broken into component parts that resembled cable connectors. The weapons themselves were Ruger .22 caliber pistols modified with custom sound suppressors, chosen because subsonic rounds at close range produced noise levels comparable to a microphone pop. Survivable in a live broadcast environment where audio engineers expected random interference. 2 weeks before execution, a support unit conducted architectural reconnaissance. Municipal blueprints from 1994 showed the building's interior structure. Satellite imagery confirmed no major renovations. The studio itself occupied approximately 20 square meters on the 3rd floor, eastern wall. The wall construction was unreinforced cinder block, 22 centimeters thick. A support team identified an adjacent storage space accessible from a rear alley. Over 3 nights, they pre-cut a breach point in the shared wall, removing blocks and replacing them with a false panel concealed behind stacked equipment crates. During pre-operation debrief, the team leader experienced what handlers call legend drift, the moment when false identity begins feeling more natural than birth name. He had spent 6 days rehearsing his cover as a Lebanese broadcast contractor named Samir, practicing equipment setup until his hands moved with unconscious competence. In a taped session later declassified, he described looking in the mirror while adjusting his cover clothing. For 3 seconds, he didn't recognize his reflection. The psychological assessment noted this as typical pre-operation dissociation, tactically useful but requiring post-mission counseling. But the mission continued. Intercepted communications from June 20th reveal al-Rashid discussing arrangements with a Hamas political officer. The conversation was tactically irrelevant, mostly logistical details about broadcast timing. But one fragment stood unrelated to operations. Al-Rashid mentioned his daughter's upcoming school examination. He asked if the interview could conclude by 11:30 hours because he had promised to help her study. Analysts noted nothing operationally significant. The detail appeared in no briefings. When al-Rashid died 72 hours later, the examination happened without him. By June 21st, all elements were positioned. The false contractor identity had been inserted into Al Jazeera's vendor database through a legacy contact. Equipment cases were staged in a rented apartment 4 blocks from the target building. Escape vehicles sat in predetermined locations. The breach point was tested. 2 operatives confirmed they could transit from studio to alley in under 40 seconds. The window was less than 24 hours. June 22nd, 2001. At 0800 hours, Team Echo 3 conducted final equipment check in their staging apartment. Each operative performed the ritual separately, assembling weapons, checking ammunition loads, verifying communication equipment. The team leader later described this moment in operational debriefs as the point where training superseded thought. His hands moved through checklist items while his conscious mind observed from distance, already committed to actions not yet taken. At 0820 hours, the team loaded equipment into a white Renault service van. The vehicle had been reported stolen 6 days earlier in Tel Aviv, then re-registered under forged Lebanese commercial plates. Every detail served dual purpose. Legitimate enough to satisfy casual inspection, disposable enough to abandon without trail. The equipment cases bore scratches and wear marks applied deliberately to suggest years of field use. Inside, microphone cables coiled around disassembled weapon components in a configuration that would pass X-ray screening as electronic assemblies. The drive to the target building took 12 minutes through morning traffic. At 0832 hours, they parked in a loading zone 30 meters from the main entrance. Standard procedure for broadcast contractors making equipment deliveries. The team leader, now fully inhabiting his Samir identity, made first contact with building security. 2 Hamas guards stopped him at the entrance, demanded identification, questioned the delivery. This was expected. Samir explained in colloquial Palestinian Arabic that Al Jazeera technical staff had ordered emergency equipment upgrade after testing revealed potential signal interference. He showed forged work orders on Al Jazeera letterhead, complete with technical jargon about frequency modulation and transmission stability. One guard made a phone call. The second guard inspected the equipment cases, opening latches to view cable coils and mixing boards. His examination was visual only, no deep search, no inventory comparison. When the phone call confirmed some version of the expected delivery, both guards stepped aside. At 0840 hours, Team Echo 3 entered the building carrying cases that collectively weighed 43 kilograms. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to reach the studio level. The building's interior was typical commercial construction. Narrow corridors, fluorescent lighting, worn linoleum floors. Studio 3 occupied the eastern corner, separated from the main hallway by a soundproof door and a small control room. The existing broadcast technician, a local employee named Mahmoud, greeted them with professional courtesy but visible anxiety about equipment changes so close to airtime. Complications emerged immediately. One guard, younger, more zealous than his downstairs counterparts, insisted on remaining inside the control room throughout the broadcast. This violated the operational plan, which required isolated control over the studio environment. The team adapted. The female operative, using her cover name Layla, engaged the guard in casual conversation about broadcast security, positioning herself between him and the equipment setup. Her role shifted from technical support to management of the human obstacle. Inside Studio 3, the team leader and second operative began installation process. Every action served multiple purposes. They replaced microphone cables with identical cables containing no modifications. The existing equipment already functioned adequately for their true purpose. They installed a backup mixer that provided genuine signal redundancy while creating visual impression of professional upgrade. They repositioned the guest microphone 3 centimeters closer to the chair's center position, improving sight lines from the control room window while appearing to optimize acoustic placement. The real work was invisible. While routing cables through floor channels, the second operative mapped the room's acoustic signature using a handheld spectrum analyzer disguised as a signal tester. He noted ambient noise floor, reverberation characteristics, and frequency response of the existing monitoring system. This data would tell them precisely how loud a suppressed gunshot would register through the broadcast feed versus the control room speakers. The analysis confirmed their calculation. A subsonic .22 caliber round at point-blank range would produce approximately 95 decibels at source, suppressed to 62 decibels 1 meter away, falling within the acoustic range of electrical feedback or cable impact. At 0930 hours, the team conducted sound check. Mahmoud monitored levels while Samir spoke test phrases into the microphone. Everything functioned normally. The guard in the control room appeared satisfied, but remained present. Layla continued her conversational management strategy, asking questions about security protocols for high-value interviews. The guard, flattered by attention, explained their screening process, their communication procedures, their pride in never allowing a security breach. What he didn't know was 3 meters away. Behind equipment racks, the team leader was assembling the first weapon from components distributed across 4 different cable bundles. At 0955 hours, activity in the building shifted. External guards radioed arrival of the interview subject. Mahmoud verified broadcast connection with Al Jazeera's main studio in Doha. The guard stopped talking, focused on the corridor. Layla moved to her predetermined position near the equipment rack, apparently adjusting cable routing but actually ensuring clear sight line to the guard should intervention become necessary. Al-Rashid arrived at 0958 hours wearing civilian clothes, dark slacks, button-down shirt, baseball cap pulled low. 2 escorts accompanied him only to the studio floor, then departed. This matched intelligence assessment. He would trust the building's perimeter security, rely on anonymity inside the controlled space. One escort reminded him, 39 minutes, then you leave. Al-Rashid nodded, checked his watch, entered the control room. This was the first moment Team Echo 3 visually confirmed their target. 3 years of pursuit. 3 years of accumulated intelligence describing a man who existed only in shadows, reduced to simple recognition. Medium build, dark hair, approximately 40 years old, moving with controlled tension that suggested tactical awareness even in supposedly safe environment. The team leader later described feeling no emotion at this moment, only the clicking sensation of contingency trees collapsing into single pathway. Mahmoud directed Al-Rashid into Studio 3. Samir, maintaining technician character, made final microphone adjustments, instructed the subject on headphone positioning, explained the interview format. Al-Rashid listened without speaking, eyes scanning the room's corners, cataloging exits. Satisfied with visual assessment, he sat in the designated chair, adjusted the microphone, put on headphones. At 10:00 hours, the on-AIR light illuminated. The interviewer's voice came through from Doha, electronically filtered for broadcast security. We are joined now by a senior Hamas military commander speaking on condition of anonymity. Sir, thank you for joining us. Al-Rashid began speaking. His voice was steady, practiced. He discussed recent operations, Israeli aggression, Palestinian resistance. The words followed predictable scripts. For 45 minutes, the building would not be interrupted. Live radio creates operational silence. No one dares disturb the broadcast. Minute by minute, the trap closed. At 10:07 hours, the second operative began tracking guard movement patterns. The building's wooden floors transmitted vibration. By placing his hand against the wall, he could feel footsteps from guards on the stairwell. 2 guards remained at ground level. One patrolled between second and third floors on 12-minute intervals. The pattern held consistency. The next patrol passage would occur at approximately 10:16 hours. At 10:12 hours, Layla positioned herself to block the control room guard's sight line to the studio window. She expressed concern about a cable routing issue, asked him to examine a connection panel, directed his attention downward and away. He complied, grateful for something to do during the broadcast's waiting period. At 10:17 hours, Samir quietly disabled the internal alarm loop connecting the studio to building security. He labeled it as preventive maintenance, addressing a ground hum issue that could cause interference during the live broadcast. Mahmoud accepted this explanation without question. Broadcast technicians frequently made last-minute adjustments to prevent audio problems. The alarm loop's disconnection meant the studio panic button now connected to nothing. Inside Studio 3, Al-Rashid continued speaking. The interview covered Hamas strategy, martyrdom operations, the justification for targeting civilians. His answers were articulate, carefully constructed to reach Al Jazeera's audience across the Arab world. He had no awareness that the East, 3 technicians who had prepared his microphone were now moving through final pre-execution positioning. At 10:29 hours, the second operative confirmed weapon assembly complete. The modified Ruger lay concealed inside a cable management box 3 feet from the studio door. The suppressor had been fabricated from titanium alloy. Internal baffles designed to reduce muzzle signature, while maintaining subsonic round accuracy at distances under 2 meters. The weapon had been test-fired extensively in controlled environments to verify acoustic signature. At the distances they would engage, the report would be comparable to dropping a heavy equipment case. At 10:38 hours, the interviewer asked about civilian casualties. Al-Rashid's response was tactical and cold. He stated that Israeli civilians were combatants by virtue of their support for occupation. He described Palestinian deaths as acceptable costs in a just struggle. He showed no hesitation, no moral uncertainty. The team leader listened through monitoring headphones, watching Al-Rashid through the control room window. Later, psychological assessments would ask whether this moment affected his execution decision. He stated it did not. The target's words were irrelevant to operational requirements. But he also noted he felt no hesitation when the time came. At 10:44 hours, the interviewer asked the final question. The broadcast was scheduled to conclude at 10:45 hours. Al-Rashid began his closing statement, thanking Al Jazeera, calling for continued resistance, invoking religious justification for armed struggle. At 10:47 hours and 32 seconds, he finished speaking. The interviewer thanked him for his time. The on-air light remained illuminated. The broadcast continued with closing commentary from Doha, but al-Rashid's participation had concluded. At 10:48 hours, al-Rashid removed his headphones. That was the vulnerability. The studio microphones remained hot, continuing to feed signal to broadcast chain. Mahmoud monitored the outgoing transmission from Doha. The guard in the control room watched the corridor. Layla stood near the equipment rack. The second operative moved to the studio door with measured casualness, entering with a clipboard as though checking final settings. Samir was already inside, positioned behind al-Rashid at approximately 1 meter distance. The weapon had been retrieved during the final minute of broadcast, concealed against his body. Al-Rashid stood from the chair, began removing the microphone pack. He was relaxed for the first time since entering the building. The interview had concluded successfully. He had delivered Hamas's message. The operation was over. The execution sequence lasted 4 seconds. Samir raised the weapon to eye level, aimed at the base of the skull from 90 centimeters. The first round was subsonic .22 long rifle, 60-grain solid point. Impact velocity, approximately 300 meters per second. The round entered at the occipital bone, traversed brainstem, exited through frontal bone, creating a wound channel of approximately 4 millimeters. Al-Rashid fell forward, impacting the desk with his torso. The second shot was fired immediately, entering the upper back at heart level. A confirmation round ensuring immediate incapacitation. The acoustic signature registered as expected. Mahmoud, focused on the broadcast feed, heard what sounded like equipment impact. Heavy cases being set down hard. The guard in the control room turned toward the sound, but saw only Layla standing by the equipment rack. The studio window was positioned such that al-Rashid's body had fallen below desk height, invisible from the control room angle. The second operative immediately began extracting the weapon. Samir exited the studio through the rear door, moving with the same measured technical expert pace he had maintained all morning. Neither appeared hurried. Neither appeared concerned. The professional detachment that had characterized the entire operation continued through these final moments. At 10:49 hours, the team reached the storage room adjacent to the studio. The pre-cut breech panel was removed in 8 seconds. Weapon components were distributed across 3 different exit paths to prevent complete compromise if one operative was intercepted. The breach led to a narrow maintenance corridor, then to the rear stairwell, then to the alley where the escape vehicle waited. At 10:50 hours and 12 seconds, Team Echo 3 exited the building. By the time guards forced the studio door at 10:53 hours, the operatives were already 6 blocks away. The building was surrounded within minutes, but by Hamas security forces focused on protecting a perimeter against external assault, not managing an internal crime scene. The extraction followed predetermined routes through urban neighborhoods. The white Renault van was abandoned in a residential area, wiped of prints, left with keys in the ignition to facilitate rapid theft. The team transferred to 3 separate vehicles, civilian sedans indistinguishable from Ramallah traffic. Each operative carried forged identification, cover stories, plausible destinations. They separated, following different routes to the primary exfiltration point, a commercial crossing used by Palestinian workers entering Israel for employment. The crossing was chosen specifically because Israeli security focused on incoming Palestinians, not outgoing contractors with European documentation. At 12:15 hours, Samir crossed through with a group of broadcast technicians returning to Jerusalem after a morning installation job. At 13:05 hours, The second operative crossed independently, his Lebanese passport attracting cursory examination. Layla crossed last at 14:20 hours. Using French-Moroccan documentation and a cover story about consulting work for international media. By 1500 hours, all three operatives were in Israeli-controlled territory. By 1800 hours, they were in debriefing rooms, providing preliminary operational reports. By 0200 hours the following morning, they were on separate flights to different countries, their covers maintained, their identities dissolved into the intelligence apparatus that had created them. In Ramallah, the body was discovered at 10:53 hours when Mahmoud, concerned by the subject's prolonged silence, entered the studio. Hamas security forces immediately locked down the building, detained all present staff, began forensic examination of the scene. The investigation found minimal evidence. Shell casings had been recovered. The breach point was discovered, but no fingerprints remained on any surface. No identifiable DNA. No surveillance footage. The building's security cameras had been disabled the previous night through a separate support operation. The death was confirmed through Hamas internal channels within 4 hours. Official announcement came at 16:30 hours through a carefully worded statement describing martyrdom during a media operation against occupation forces. The phrasing was deliberately vague, acknowledging death while obscuring the operational security failure it represented. Al Jazeera issued no public statement, but quietly replaced 3 local staff members in subsequent weeks. Palestinian Authority Security Services conducted parallel investigation, finding nothing that contradicted the basic scenario. Professional infiltration, precise execution, complete extraction. Official Israeli statements were silence. Government spokesman declined comment on the death. Defense Ministry sources provided no confirmation or denial. This pattern matched operational doctrine for denied operations: maintain ambiguity. Let the action speak through inference rather than acknowledgement. The calculation was straightforward. Hamas would know Israeli involvement without requiring proof. The demonstration of capability serving strategic purpose independent of official attribution. What intelligence analysts worldwide understood immediately was the sophistication level displayed. The operation required months of preparation, detailed architectural reconnaissance, seamless document forgery, native-level linguistic capability, and surgical execution timing. The breach and exfiltration method was textbook Mossad tradecraft refined over decades. The acoustic signature management demonstrated technical understanding of broadcast environments. Every element pointed to state-level intelligence service operating at peak capability. Strategically, Hamas lost a planner whose skill set could not be rapidly replaced. Al-Rashid's compartmentalization protocols meant no deputy had comprehensive knowledge of his operational network. His loss fragmented command structure across the central West Bank. Operations he had planned continued through momentum, but lacked adaptive coordination. Intelligence assessments from August 2001 noted measurable decline in Hamas operational tempo in the specific geographic area al-Rashid had controlled. But the cost extended beyond immediate tactical impact. Palestinian media institutions became permanent targets of suspicion. Journalists faced enhanced security screening. Interview subjects demanded additional verification of staff identities. Al Jazeera faced internal crisis about source protection. If their interview arrangements could be penetrated, could they guarantee any source's safety? The erosion of trust between media organizations and militant groups created information vacuum that persisted for years. The operation became case study material within intelligence communities globally. British MI6 analysts studied the media exploitation methodology, American intelligence services examined the breach and exfiltration timing. Russian services analyzed the compartmentalization that prevented comprehensive compromise, even when operatives were physically present in hostile territory for extended duration. The scenario appeared in classified training materials under various code names, teaching the doctrine of environmental assassination, where space, routine, and expectation become weapons more effective than force. For the three operatives, consequences followed separate trajectories. The team leader required 6 months of psychological counseling to manage what post-mission assessments identified as acute dissociation disorder. In debriefing sessions, he described recurring dreams where he was Samir the technician, where the mission never happened, where al-Rashid completed his interview and went home to help his daughter study. The condition was common among deep cover operatives who maintained legends under extreme stress. Treatment involved cognitive behavioral therapy focused on reassociating his primary identity. He returned to operational status 14 months after the mission, but never accepted another deep cover assignment. The second operative experienced no significant psychological aftereffects. His assessment reports described the operation as tactically routine, the kill as mechanically necessary. He continued active service for 7 additional years before retiring to instructor position. Layla developed hypervigilance symptoms that manifested 6 months post-operation. Intrusive awareness of threat vectors in everyday environments. Difficulty transitioning out of operational mindset. She left field operations voluntarily after 2 years, transferred to analytical division, where her tactical insights proved valuable without requiring direct operational engagement. The daughter al-Rashid had mentioned never learned why her father didn't return to help her study. She passed her examination through her own preparation. Years later, in an interview with a Palestinian oral history project, she described him as a distant figure who prioritized cause over family, but whom she believed had died for principles he held sacred. She did not know his death came from microphones disguised as safety. The legacy endured through doctrine shift. Intelligence agencies worldwide updated threat models to include media access as attack vector. Journalists working in conflict zones faced additional security burdens, verification protocols, technical sweeps, identity confirmations that slowed reporting and increased operational costs. Some organizations stopped conducting interviews with high-value targets entirely, concluding the risk outweighed journalistic value. The space where journalism and conflict intersected became permanently weaponized. From one perspective, this operation was surgical precision. No airstrike, no civilian casualties. One life to prevent the deaths he would plan. The operation removed a commander whose tactical planning had already resulted in multiple civilian casualties and would likely produce more. The method minimized collateral damage. The execution was clean. By utilitarian calculation, the operation saved lives by eliminating future threat. From another perspective, this operation weaponized journalism itself, turning the tools of information into camouflage for state violence. Media interviews represent one of the last neutral spaces in conflict zones where adversaries can communicate without immediate violence. By penetrating that space, intelligence services eroded the foundations of war communication, the belief that some channels remain separate from direct combat. When microphones become potential weapons, interview subjects must choose between silence and vulnerability. The chilling effect on journalism in conflict zones continues decades later. The question that remains unanswered: when intelligence agencies turn media access into operational battlefield, do they save lives by eliminating threats? Or do they destroy the possibility of truth existing independently from violence? The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Operation Silent Wave. If journalism serves as neutral ground, even in war, then penetrating that neutrality constitutes violation of rules that transcend immediate tactical advantage. If war contains no neutral ground, then media environments are simply another domain where threats can be engaged and eliminated. What's your take on weaponizing journalism for tactical advantage? Does the precision of the method justify the erosion of media trust? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider the boundaries between information warfare and physical violence, hit that like button and share with someone who thinks intelligence operations have clear ethical lines.